Blood vessels are a really important part of the circulatory system, and the circulatory system is made up of the heart plus all of the blood vessels, and there's three major types of blood vessels. There's veins, there's arteries, and there's also capillaries, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Let's look at arteries first, and this is actually a microscope picture of an artery. So arteries carry blood away from the heart. So here's our heart, and you'll see this diagram over and over again, and the blood is travelling away from the heart out of these vessels here. So these vessels are called arteries. And in arteries, the blood pressure is always high. If you think about the heart as a big pump, at the start of that pump, for instance, if you turn the hose on, the pressure is always going to be higher at the start of the pump than it is at the end of the pump. So when the heart squeezes, it squeezes the blood out through these blood vessels or arteries, and the blood pressure in there is high. This one's called your pulmonary artery, and this one's called an aorta, but we'll get into detail of the heart in another video. And here's just another diagram representation of a heart, but as I said, we'll get into hearts later. Arteries have thick muscular walls, and that's to withstand that high blood pressure. So here's a cross-section of an artery, and you can see here it's got very thick walls. That's because the blood pressure is high, and that's so that they don't collapse under that pressure or break under that pressure. The blood will flow from arteries into arterioles and then into capillaries, and it looks something like this. So the arteries coming away from the heart, it branches into smaller blood vessels called arteriole, which are like baby arteries, and then it branches into even smaller blood vessels called capillaries. The blood pressure reduces as we go along, and as I said, it's a little bit like a hose. It's really high pressure coming out of the heart, and as it moves through, it loses pressure, so the blood pressure will decrease. When you measure a pulse, which I'm sure all of you've done before, and the best place to do that is in your wrist or in your neck. And what's actually happening there, it's when the arteries are expanding under that high pressure of blood coming out from the heart. And you can feel that pulsating, and that's what the pulse is. You're feeling your heart beating and pumping out that blood. Veins. Veins are pretty much the opposite of arteries in the fact that they carry blood towards the heart or to the heart. So here's our heart diagram again, and it's through here towards the heart, through these veins, that the heart receives blood. This is called the vena cava, and this is the pulmonary vein. And blood pressure is much lower in veins because it's further away from the heart. So if we have a look at a cross-section of a vein, we'll see that it's a lot thinner. But the material that it's made out of is very elastic, which means it's easily stretched and easily moved around. And the reason for this is that the way that the blood gets through the body in the veins, because the pressure is a lot lower, is that the muscles surrounding the veins will squeeze onto the vein to push the blood along. You'll see here's the vein, and these are muscles on the outside. So when blood's gone down to our hands and to our feet, it's the muscles around the outside which actually will push against the vein and squeeze it, like pushing substance through cannelloni. If you're stuffing cannelloni and you'll squeeze the tube, or squeezing a tube of toothpaste, similar sort of thing. It's that squeezing action that'll push the blood along. Now you'll also notice in a vein it has something else which is special. These are called valves, and these are one-way valves. They're a little bit like gates, that they only let blood go through in one direction. And here's a picture here of the valve closed, so the blood cannot move back into the opposite direction. It's a one-way gate. And here you'll see the valves open, so it allows blood to only flow in this direction. This is really important in the legs, because you think of the blood having to travel all the way back up the body. You don't want blood going backwards. So this is what a vein will look like, and this is a picture of a leg. So here's a vein in a leg, and when the valves are open, the blood can move in this direction. So upwards back towards the heart, because that's where we want it to go. But when the valves are closed, you'll notice here, blood is unable to flow backwards. That's what we want and what's ideal. However, you may have heard of varicose veins. So in varicose veins, what happens is the blood is allowed to go backwards. That's not great, because what happens is it starts forming these little ugly cluster of globules of blood, basically, which will cause what's known as a varicose vein, and they're quite painful in people. So varicose veins will occur when these valves are not working properly and blood is allowed to flow backwards. Capillaries. Capillaries are these teeny tiny little blood vessels. There's lots and lots of them, and they're tiny, and they're approximately the same diameter as a red blood cell. So here you'll see a red blood cell, and a red blood cell can just squeeze through the walls, or through the inside of a capillary. This is important because it's when the red blood cells and the blood squeezes through these capillaries that the exchange of gas and nutrients occurs, and this is called diffusion, and we're going to be discussing diffusion in another video. So here we can see cells on the side, and what's happening with these cells is that cellular respiration is occurring, and for cellular respiration to occur they need oxygen. They get this oxygen from the red blood cells, which, remember, carry oxygen on their hemoglobin. So these red blood cells squeeze through these capillaries, and as they do, they let go of the oxygen, which can go into the surrounding cells. And here's a microscope photo, and you'll see these tiny capillaries, and what I'm pointing to now are your red blood cells. And you can see here perfectly that they actually squeeze through those capillaries. It's a tight squeeze. And that's one of the reasons that red blood cells don't have nucleuses, so that they can get through these tiny, tiny spaces. Capillaries are also large in number, so that they've got a large surface area, and that's why they're so small and there's so many of them, because it's important here for the exchange of materials such as glucose, oxygen, and different nutrients to be able to get through these capillaries from the blood into the cells, and from the cells and waste products back into the blood. So capillaries, the blood moves to venules, which are smaller veins, into veins, and then back to the heart. So the whole process goes from the heart to an artery, which branches into arterioles, which branch into those tiny capillaries, which form larger venules, and then form large veins, which carry blood back to the heart. A comparison again is artery have nice thick walls because they carry high pressure blood. Veins have thinner and elastic walls because the blood pressure is lower, and the muscles around the outside help to squeeze the blood back to the heart. Remember, veins also have valves, and it's an easy way to remember it: V, vein, V, and valve. And capillaries are a very thin and very small blood vessel.